Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Burning Archive live stream. I'm Jeff Rich. If this is the first time you're here, the Burning Archive is a YouTube channel dedicated to the serious discussion of world affairs, world culture in the context of world history. I talk about all sorts of things: book reviews, geopolitics, films, and I also share with you both some of the essays that I write on Substack and other publications, and also I share some of my readings of some of the finer works of history and literature. And if this is not your first time here, if you're coming back for more of the Burning Archive, welcome. Say hello in the chat. I'd love to sort of see you there. And if you're only watching this live stream, when it's on later, it's a replay, send us a comment, say hello in the comments on the chat. I try to respond to all my comments on the YouTube channel, and I have been getting some great comments over the last week or two in response to some of my material, my videos on the end of empire moment, the Suez moment for the West, that some are predicting if the West is defeated in Ukraine, and also in response to some of my discussions of history and my reading of Kamo no Chome's Hojoki, the great 12th century text of Japanese literature in the Buddhist tradition, a story of a literary retreat, a search for detachment from all the disasters that were befalling Japan in the 12th century, and a search for peace and wisdom and detachment from suffering and the endless chain of suffering in a literary hut in 12th century Japan. And I've even received today a comment from a Japanese person. So thank you very much for that comment. I will translate it a little bit later and be sure to respond to you. So do send me some comments on the videos. I really appreciate it, even if it's technical stuff, because I'm still learning the ropes with all the software and the technology. Doing my best, but inevitably there's a few mistakes along the way. And of course, you'll just sort of theme of today's live stream is end of empire. How do empires end? Do they end with a bang or with a whimper? And this kind of discussion I have seen in quite a few places in recent times. There are many YouTube videos disputing, arguing for the case of whether America is in decline, whether it is an empire that is about to fall, whether it will collapse like Rome, descend into civil war, all sorts of predictions, whether it will be overtaken by China and the BRICS and other challenger nations. And indeed, just today, I think, at least today, Australian time, the RAND Corporation in the United States of America has published a report or a discussion paper or a pamphlet, I guess, called The Sources of Renewed National Dynamism. Let me see if I can't just share with you that document. There we are. I hope you can see that. The Sources of Renewed National Dynamism, published April 30, 2024. And it says there, history is full of great powers that hit a peak of competitive power and then stagnate and eventually decline. There are fewer cases of great powers that have confronted such headwinds and managed to generate a repeated upward trajectory to renew their power and standing in both absolute and relative terms, both being the biggest and the number one. Arguably, that is precisely the challenge that faces the United States. Its competitive position is threatened both from within, in terms of slowing productivity growth, an aging population, a polarized political system, and an increasingly corrupted information environment. And outside, in terms of a rising direct challenge from China and declining deference. That's right, to any audience members out there in the global majority. The United States elite, as represented by the Rand Corporation, is annoyed that you are not showing sufficient deference to a US power. And this is coming from dozens of developing nations. Left unchecked, these trends will threaten domestic and international sources of competitive standing, thus accelerating the relative decline in US standing. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now. Hang on. I'm not sure that I am still sharing. Okay. Okay, I'm all good now. And everyone, anyone watching, remember throw in a thing into the chat. And I must say, what I will also do is produce an edited version of this, the core part of this stream, discussing the theme of how do empires fall, and produce that either in a few days' time, potentially even on Friday. And I titled or put in the thumbnail of this live stream, Bang or Whimper. And of course, this is a reference to that famous line of poetry, "This is how the world ends." Let me quote it to you. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper. And of course, that is from T.S. Eliot, Thomas Stearns Eliot, an American who became a Britisher, written or published in 1925, pretty much written exactly 100 years ago. And the poem is The Hollow Men, and perhaps that is the perfect poem to describe the nature of the leadership elite in many parts of the world, the kind of leadership elite that is producing documents such as the Rand Corporation's The Source of Renewed National Dynamism. We are the hollow men, we are the stuffed men leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. I also read just before the program that when T.S. Eliot was asked after World War II, and of course after the tragedy of the American bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, in the unnecessary bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima in 1945, he was asked, would you still write this line of poetry? And he said, no, I don't think I would, both in deference, due deference perhaps, to the sensitivities of the victims of bombing throughout the world in World War II. But also, he said he'd spoken to family members of victims of bombing, and he said perhaps he would say that the world did not end with either a bang or a whimper, because many reported to him that when their houses were bombed, uh, they heard no noise. So, yes, the hollow men, and there is this sense of growing weakness of leadership in the West that is provoking discussions all over the place about the end of empire. And it is indeed this whole question of how empires end that is kind of addressed in the Rand Corporation's report. Because what it's really trying to say is that its social scientists have studied, uh, you know, a few at least cases of how empires end, how they fall, how great states, great nations lose their dynamism and their competitiveness, and how, in a few cases, people or empires, nations, great states have recovered that sense of competitiveness and national dynamism. They examined what they described as the problem of national decline and renewal. It is part, they write, of a larger study on the societal determinants of a nation's competitive position, which has nominated several key qualities that determine a society's competitive success and failure. This is very much like a McKinsey report on nations' competition. And what they argue is that the United States has the capacity to bounce back from its the threats and the apparent decline. The United States has all the preconditions, they say, for a potential agenda of anticipatory renewal. It has tremendous residual strengths and a proven capacity uh, for lost my mark there for a second, for resilience and renewal. It has the scale and industrial and scientific foundations and a rich reservoir of social actors to remain one of the great powers at the apex of world politics. And interestingly, because my channel is really a channel about history, one of the interesting things about this report is that it uses historical examples to make its case. It looks through the vast record of history and the fall and rise and decline and bounce back of empires around the world. It thinks it has looked at how empires end and how empires can stop themselves from falling. And it has a recipe, but it's only really identified two cases of successful national renewal of what's the word, national dynamism. And those two cases, interestingly enough, are curiously chosen cases. One is Britain in the 1830s and 1840s, an interesting time and an interesting period to choose. And the second one is the United States itself in the period 1870s to 1890s. Again, a curious time to choose. And I think what we'll find is in both these cases, there's really reasons to doubt how reliable they are as, I guess, genuine cases of um, of renewed of national renewal, of the attempt to break the decline of an empire, the decline of the sort of historical forces driving the change in circumstances. Let me just take a little pause there and just remind you, while I just gather my breath, that as well as watching my YouTubes, you can subscribe to a weekly newsletter about world history, world culture, literature, and world affairs that I publish on Substack, the Burning Archive, it is. And you can subscribe to that for free at jeffrich, jeffrich.substack.com. And if you upgrade your subscription to a paid subscription, I think it's kind of about $10 a month Australian, about $8 maybe US dollars. I don't know what it would be in euros or in some other currencies, but about $10 Australian, which is about 80 cents US dollars. You $8, I guess, US dollars. You will get an additional weekly essay on world history and world affairs, which I publish, in fact, on Wednesday evenings at 6:30. The next issue is literally coming out in 10 minutes, roughly. And I can tell you that article that you will get if you join my paid subscription on Substack is part of a series I'm writing on a brief history of the multipolar world. A lot of people are talking about the birth of the multipolar world, the end of the unipolar moment. And there's a lot of truth to that. But I take the perspective that has been expressed by the Indian External Affairs Minister, that a kind of a fog came over the minds of geopolitical strategists, world leaders, sometime around about 1991, when they came to believe that there really was, one hyperpower in the world in the United States, and that the world really did revolve around one pole, one power only, the United States. That, in Francis Fukuyama's famous phrase, the US had ended history, that there was what would you say? There was that the United States had won the game of history. But what became clear over the last 30 years that was never really so. And I really argue that, in a way, the world has always been multipolar. And if we tell some different stories about how empires end and how they've risen and fallen and changed over the years, then we will come to some different conclusions about the nature of our world today. So I'm writing this whole series on a brief history of the multipolar world, and the article this week looks really at some of the key stories we tell ourselves about the nature of the post 1945 world, the world that we think of as the world of the Cold War, a world carved up between two superpowers, a bipolar world, the Soviet Union, and then 1/6 of the world's land, area, and the United States of America. For a while, Britain also fought. It still had an empire. It still was a superpower. But so, as we discussed last week, that delusion fell flat on its face in 1956 during the Suez Crisis. So, so subscribe to jeffrich.substack.com and you'll be able to explore all those writings and my other material as well. And I also write a free weekly essay on Saturday mornings. It comes out. So if you go to jeffrich.substack.com, whether you want to pay or not, you'll learn a lot, I think, about geopolitics and world history and culture and literature. Because I think, in a way, culture and literature in these difficult times are perhaps more sustaining for us than reading the newspapers, following the news, going down rabbit holes on social media. So that's the kind of thing I hope to offer you all on the Burning Archive Substack. I hope you enjoy that. And if there's anyone online who wants to sing out and ask me a question, please do so as well. Now, the other, just to come back to the main theme of the end of empires and how do empires end? I guess one of the thoughts that I brought to this video, this live video discussion, was that I was actually teaching one of my online history courses on civilizations this week, and it was in part a discussion of the Roman Empire. This course I'm doing on civilizations focuses on the book by Felipe Fernandez Armesto, Civilizations, which who I interviewed last year for the channel, and you can check out that that interview on my sort of YouTube channel. But he reflected in that book that the general way in which people tell the story of the Roman Empire is as the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. But the story doesn't really go that way. He says that really what happens is that the empire is constantly mutating and slowly transforms itself, slowly changes itself out of existence. And it's true that although there are 1,000 bad history YouTube videos out there on the fall of the Roman Empire, which generally make all sorts of assumptions about kind of moral corruption or failed leadership or military overstretch or taxation or debt or one of 100 and more causes that have been identified for the fall of the Roman Empire. The actual story of the fall of the Roman Empire is much harder to pin down. But it has become, if you like, the iconic myth of how empires collapse, how empires end. So there are so many popular historical geopolitical discussions that really compare the United States with Rome in one way or the other. And that's perhaps not entirely surprising because, of course, the founding fathers of the United States themselves saw themselves as the inheritors of the Roman tradition, just as the British imperial aristocracy saw themselves in that way as well. So what Felipe Fernandez Armesto really says here is that the story is not really how we are accustomed, or let's say the pattern of real events is not as we are habituated to telling the story about it is. It's not a rise and fall story. It's not an up and down. It's not even something which is necessarily a coherent whole story. It's slowly, it's like a huge kaleidoscope that changes over time rather than this single integrated empire that rots from the head down. So, the way in which we tell stories about how empires end is very profoundly shaped not so much by, if you like, the facts as our preference for certain types of stories about empires. And I think you can also see this kind of thing in place in the Rand Corporation's discussion about the renewal of national dynamism. Because in searching for cases of how empires end and whether they can stave off that ending, it has been extraordinarily selective in its study of the research. It it claims to find only a couple of examples of great powers that have, as they said, confronted such headwinds and managed to generate a repeated upward trajectory. But let's look at the case of Rome itself. Rome had many ups and downs. It had a period of 5 bad emperors, notoriously bad emperors, including Nero. It had a later period of renewal and greatness under a series of emperors, including Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who features, of course, in Ridley Scott's film Gladiator. And and when exactly did Rome end? Was it, the barbarian invasions in the 400s or the 300s or the 500s? What about the Eastern Roman Empire? Byzantine, as we came to know it, particularly informed by Edward Gibbon's rise and fall of the Roman Empire, or the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, which profoundly influenced the American Republic's sense of itself, of its historical destiny, and of the pattern of, national dynamism. That still seems to inform the mindset of many of the um, advisors, consultants, whoever they are, who've contributed to this RAND Corporation report on the renewal of the sources of renewed national dynamism. And Byzantine, Constantine moved the Roman Empire's capital from Rome to Constantinople. That itself was a dramatic act of confronting such headwinds and generating a repeated upward trajectory. He moved the center of the empire to a much more strategic location, much more connected to the Asia that even then was crucial to Rome's power, its trade, and many other factors. And then the Byzantine Eastern Roman Empire itself had its ups and downs, its struggles. It had a resurgence under Justinian. It had a challenge from Islam. It had a resurgence in sort of what's often known as the Byzantine sort of Renaissance, a period of great cultural renewal. I think the 9th and 10th, maybe the 11th centuries. It had shocks and bad moments as well, including, of course, the disastrous Second Crusade. Um, and it was ultimately really only destroyed in 1453. But even then, the spirit of Rome lived on. In the Orthodox world, it transferred its iconography, its imperial legacy to Moscow in the north, which came to think of itself as the Third Rome, as a case of national or imperial cultural renewal. And then Britain and the United States claimed the classical Western heritage for themselves. And I go into that whole story of how Britain and America sort of claimed the heritage of Rome, the heritage of classical civilization as the direct descendant of Greece and Rome in a video I did a month or two ago called The Myth of the West, which looks at Nuche McSweeney's book about the myth of the West. It's a great video. I hope you like it, and you should check it out. Just there. When I edit the video, it will be just there. It's not just there yet in the live stream, of course. So let me just pause there a second again while I just take my breath. And pepperoni, fantastic. What are you doing? You're herding goats. So can't chat much, but listening. I'm so pleased to hear that, pepperoni. Where are you herding goats? Let me know when you can. Of course, I don't want you to lose any of your goats, but that is fantastic. How evocative of the spirit of Greece and Rome is that, to be herding goats. I hope to hear from you soon as to where in the world you're herding goats. And one of the things I really hope to do in this channel is not only speak to people from the West, not only speak to America and people from where I'm from, the Anglophone world, Australia, etc., but speak to people all around the world. And I know I've received comments on my YouTube channel, French, in Russian, in Japanese, and other languages, and I do my best to understand them all. I know a little bit of Russian and a little bit of French. And Google Translate, of course, helps with other things. So wherever you're from around the world, do let us know, and do let us know how you're seeing the changing world today and what challenges it presents to you in terms of living in tune with the world. Top end in Australia. There you go. Herding goats in Australia, up near Darwin. Well away from the Greek and Roman ancient traditions that I imagined, sort of bucolic fantasy. Pepperoni is herding goats in the Northern Territory with a drone. There we go. Drones are changing, not just military warfare. They're changing so much about our world today, and the world is changing as we speak. I love that story about herding goats with a drone. Thanks for sharing that, pepperoni. Okay, now let me think where I am at. Okay, so let's go back to the sources of renewed national dynamism. This report by the RAND Corporation, and as I said, it sort of I'll just read you perhaps its key findings so that you sort of know where it's coming from and the kind of strength of argument that it really has. And I'll just make a couple of comments about that and then talk maybe about the the historical cases, the two cases it referred to: Britain in the 1840s and the United States in the 1870s, 1890s, because there's some serious questions about both these examples, whether they really justify the confidence of America that it can really turn things around. So its key findings are that recovery from significant long-term national decline is rare and difficult to detect in the historical record. Now, of course, what does this really mean, recovery from significant long-term national decline? How do we measure that? How, given the patchiness of the historical record, given the extent of empires and cultures that have, risen and fallen, waxed and waned, fluctuated, transformed themselves over millennia, how soundly based is that argument really? Is it really just an assumed starting point to say, of course, America can remain the greatest power on earth, just as Joe Biden says? And then they say the United States may be entering a period requiring the kind of anticipatory national renewal that we found in several historical cases. And I should add, by the way, that this RAND Corporation report is really just hot off the presses. So I don't think I've seen any discussions on YouTube about this. So this may be, this is pretty new news. And this is generally the RAND Corporation is, it's a prestige organization. So it produces quality stuff and is often a early warning indicator of the kind of directions that the kind of key security foreign policy personnel in the United States government really wants to take their national policy directions. Then it says several common factors appear to distinguish cases of anticipatory renewal from failures. So that's the bouncing back from a sense of decline. And they are based on an earlier study done by RAND and not a terribly compelling study in my view. Then they say the United States does not yet appear to be demonstrating widespread shared recognition of societal challenges or determination and reform and change in key issue areas. So in this sense, it says, it has not yet reached the position of Britain in the 1840s and 1850s or the United States after the 1890s, at which times both nations witnessed a surge of generalized reform to address multiple social challenges. So what are the blocks? The blocks are a lack of consensus, a lack of cohesive leadership to solve these issues. But they have hope because they say the United States has all the preconditions for a potential agenda of anticipatory renewal. Excuse me. And here is, I guess, the key statement, the key, I guess, more declaration of intent. This is trying to forge, I'd say, a consensus amongst the elite in America to make America great again, but not in the way that some populist leaders in America have argued for. And I'm not arguing one way or the other what that should be. I guess it's up to the United States people or leadership to work that out. I just wish they'd cause less suffering for the rest of the world on the way of doing it. But anyhow, The United States has all the preconditions for anticipatory renewal, which is their term for rising again, making themselves great again. It is not consigned by international politics to further relative decline, especially regarding China, which has its own problems in this regard. It says the United States is not in the position of the Soviet Union in the 1980s. And let me just add in there, I did a video a few months back, which I'll include in the video description below when I edit this one, which is about a fabulous book by Vladislav Zubok. Just give me a second, I'll get it for you. Collapse, the Fall of the Soviet Union. This is, I think, a compelling read. It's about a contentious subject, and it's about a subject about which people disagree. I haven't read this report in enough detail to really know whether Vladislav Zubok has contributed to or been referred to in this discussion, but my brief read of their discussion of the Soviet Union story was that he probably hasn't, because it was a highly ideologically charged set of comments, and the very unique particular character of the collapse, the fall of the Soviet Union is superbly narrated in Vladislav Zubok's book, and he ends his book by really, if you like, perhaps warning America that it could well suffer that fate as well. So the RAND Corporation's declaring its faith in this regard, but whether it's really true, I'm not so sure. Anyhow, let's continue with the RAND Corporation. It has tremendous residual strengths and a proven capacity for resilience and renewal. It has the scale and the industrial and scientific foundations to remain one of the great powers at the apex of world politics. Now, there's a little fudge there, isn't there? One of the great powers at the apex of world politics, not the sole greatest power, most powerful nation on the face of the earth, the greatest nation that has ever existed, the greatest military that's ever existed, all the rest of it. There's a kind of secret modesty being introduced here by the RAND Corporation about articulating a goal for America to remain one of the great powers at the apex of world politics, and consequently no longer live in a unipolar world, face the realities that the world is, always was, always will be multipolar, and the 30-year fantasy that America could make the world flat, could broadcast to the world through Netflix and end history and all the rest of it, all the extravagant American supremacist dreams, the dreams of American primacy. It needs to abandon those, and maybe in its own little way, the RAND Corporation is suggesting that a more modest goal for America in its politics would be a sensible thing, and perhaps a redirection to forging internal cohesion, internal domestic repair in the United States would not be such a bad thing for at least Americans, if not for the US empire. But it says it has a rich reservoir of social actors capable of conducting the same sort of campaign for reform and renewal that occurred in Victorian era Britain and the turn of the century United States. So those are the two cases, historical cases, that the Rand Corporation uses to get the template for how to turn the ship of America around, how to rebuild that bridge in Baltimore, how to fix its healthcare system, how to fix its broken politics, its overextended military, all that sort of thing. And I don't think I'll go deeply into the type of solutions that the Rand Corporation proposes. I'll just read to you, though, the characteristics they say is associated with national renewal based on their extensive, thorough sociological and political and historical research. So one is a clear recognition of key problems. One is an accurate diagnosis of the challenges. 3 is a problem-solving mindset. 4 is a multiple and overlapping efforts to solve distinct challenges. Wow, multiple and overlapping efforts to solve distinct challenges. Capable governance structures and social institutions. Elite commitment to the common good. And it's interesting that the Rand Corporation says that that's not entirely apparent in America. Participation in an era's core model of value creation, which I think they mean control of the economy, and sustainable access to essential resources for renewal, financial and material, which, the pirate tradition of the American empire continues. Dear me, they really do need to break up Russia to get access to all those resources and fix their China trade problem. So it concludes a chapter with the lessons for the United States, and I may yet do a separate video on this when I've examined this in more detail. But in this live stream, I kind of want to comment just quickly on the 3 case studies of national renewal that they refer to. The third one is the late Cold War Soviet Union, which I don't really rate the Rand Corporation's assessment of that at all, really. I don't think it's terribly good. The second is the post-Gilded Age of the United States, the era between 1870s and the 1890s, and they really evoke here, I guess, the progressive reform movements of the late 1890s, the kind of progressive reform that became associated with people like Woodrow Wilson, like to some degree Teddy Roosevelt, and like urban reformers like I think it's Jane Jacobs, and then also the third one is the Victorian era Britain, by which they mean Britain in the 1830s and 1840s. And let's just briefly look at how they describe each of those things. And I'm going to comment on how I think they are pretty unreliable accounts of what really was happening in the world. And the big story I think you really need to bear in mind here, and which I don't think you really need to know all that much about the detailed history of these periods to really know, is that is that uh, the RAND Corporation is really trying to present a case that how empires end is within empire's control. It's within the domestic political arrangements. It's within the morale and the culture and the capability and the actions, particularly of the leadership elite of a society, to decide whether or not the empires will end. And what they tend not to really look at is, I guess, the forces of history, the driving changes of globalization and other factors. The real great rise of the United States was certainly in this period, 1870 to 1890, but also First World War and the Second World War, and then the end of the Cold War. International events, globalization of different eras, major technological change, access to resources that became critical, not just for that single nation, but around the world, changing the flow of ideas, resources, technologies, political models, cultural models around the world. The RAND Corporation report is really totally silent on those factors. And, it's interesting that I've just finished reading a wonderful book by the historian John Darwin called Unlocking the World Port Cities in the Age of Steam Globalization, which I think he dates around about 1830. This period where Victorian Britain really leaps ahead to like about 1920, and he, as most world historians, global historians, really do argue that the critical moment of the shift in power of the West and the rest of the world really occurs in this sort of period, 1800 to 1830, and it's not all about the Industrial Revolution. It's about a range of other factors. But one of the most critical factors is the application of steam technology to railways and to steamships from the 1830s. That in really probably the world's most distinguished historian of empires, defines the characteristic mode of globalization, of economic development, of the projection of geopolitical power, the projection in the RAND Corporation's terms of national dynamism. That process really began and was not only just driven by Britain, but also occurred in other parts of Europe and in the United States. That process really began in this period in the 1830s and 1840s. That RAND Corporation identifies as the case of Britain turning itself around. And similarly, America's dynamism in the 1870s and 1890s is partly driven by this, partly driven by the opening up of its internal resources, the conquest of the, remaining Native American Indian sort of empires within the 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 joining up into of the whole continent. These are critical factors in this national dynamism, as much as the kind of morale and leadership and political factors, really ideological factors identified in the comments by the Rand Corporation. So let me again just return to what they say. But they say this is their description of Britain in this period. By the early 19th century, Britain was already a leading great power. It was by many measures the world's chief maritime power, financial powerhouse, industrial revolution. But by the mid-1800s, Britain was also confronted by a series of daunting social, political, and economic challenges. The human and environmental toll of industrialization, perceived corruption and ineffectiveness of political institutions, control of politics by a small group of landowning elites, rising economic inequality, and more. Our first phase analysis strongly suggests they could have weakened the country's coherence, finances, political stability, and economic performances in serious ways if left unaddressed. But between the 1820s and the 1880s, so it's a pretty long period, a wave of reform swept over multiple areas of British life. Major legislation expanded the voting franchise, addressed working conditions for women and children, expanded educational opportunities, addressed the environmental cost of industrialization, and much more. It reflected a complex shift in grassroots recognition of multiple challenges by different groups in society. Now, this is really a fairy tale about a sort of is a great comment from Pepperoni in the comments too, saying it was the Rand Corporation that came up with the comments, and indeed it was. There's a Rand Corporation report talking about stretching Russia or something like that, which really talks about a range of the geopolitical strategies that America has employed in Ukraine and Georgia and around Russia. So absolutely on the mark there, Pepperoni. Great comment. But coming back to this Rand Corporation, they're really telling a fairy tale about the British Empire, the British society, British politics, a fairy tale to make it sound, well, not dissimilar to, I guess, what the current governing elites in America want to do with America. And the kind of language is really the kind of language that sounds like sort of what you'd get from a management consultant trying to solve political problems. Let's identify problems, develop practical solutions, and carry them out. This is really nonsense about what happened in Britain in the 1840s, and I may well go into more depth about this later, but it's a classic case of the misuse of a historical comparison for contemporary policy judgments. So if you really want to have a better understanding of what happened in Britain, in response to these challenges, and how it was intimately connected with the empire, the world system that Britain dominated, I recommend you read John Darwin's books, including Unlocking the World about STEM globalization, but also his book, The the empire project, the British world system. Because, what else is happening in the 1840s? There's the Chartist movement. In the 1850s, there's the first Indian War of Independence, brutally and shockingly and immorally put down by Britain. That counts as national dynamism. The 1840s, Britain is conducting the immoral, disgraceful, shameful, one could say almost barbaric opium wars in China. Is that national dynamism? Has that really got something to do with a program of well-conceived, national leadership and reform, which has a strong social basis? I really don't think so. Obviously, there's a lot of other things going on in Britain in this case, but I think you can just tell from this detailed example how wrong it is. Now, I had thought I would talk about the post-Gilded Age United States case study, and I will do it briefly, but perhaps at less length because I don't know it quite so well. But then they talk about the United States confronting a significant and potentially growing social and political challenges that threaten to undermine the country's advance to global predominance. Well, it did fight a civil war in the 1860s. Did they mention that here? They don't mention that there. They don't mention that the United States is benefiting from that steam globalization, is being transformed in its fundamental infrastructure and all the rest of it by that steam globalization. Nor do they mention that they are expanding into the American interior. They are expanding down to and deepening their control over Central America. And of course, in the 1890s, America, for all its progressivism, is also establishing its own colonies in Cuba and the Philippines as well. Well and truly an American empire at that point. So this is astonishingly unreliable history. So if, I haven't read the report in detail, but it is a classic case of people picking the eyes out of past events to really make a predetermined political case. So I think the significance of this Rand Corporation report is really a signalling of intention, and we might sort of get to that signalling of intention. So I might get to that signalling of intention in a later Substack article, later YouTube video, but I think I might start to wrap things up now. Pepperoni, if you've got another question, by all means, throw one in, and if anyone else has another question, by all means, throw it in. But I would urge everyone to make sure you subscribe to my Substack newsletter, jeffrich.substack.com. Last Saturday, in my free newsletter, I wrote a piece about Babylon Berlin, the fantastic historical crime fiction drama that has been streamed around the world and is currently showing on SBS Special Broadcasting Service in Australia, which is a fantastic institution, something perhaps some other countries in the world should adopt as well. But Babylon Berlin is a fantastic show, and I've got into the I'm trying to establish the habit now of doing short 5 minute video on a Saturday afternoon that lets you know about what is in my most recent Substack, gives you a bit of a sense of it. And I will be doing another video on the channel, a more extended video on the channel shortly about Babylon Berlin, because I've had a great response to that little video talking about Babylon Berlin. It really is a great show. And I think what it does is give us a fresh insight into the centrality of Germany in modern history. Arguably, you could say Germany was a case in the 1930s of renewed national dynamism, although I'm not praising it. I'm just showing that objective is really not the objective one should be pursuing. Germany, which really only formed together as a nation and as an empire in the 1870s and was defeated in World War One, and yet came back with tragic consequences to try to form itself as to lift its position in the relative stakes of world power through the 1920s and 1930s. Yeah, well, Pepperoni has just said coming up with questions, but they all need hours to answer. So why don't you, if you're feeling that way too, take your time and just leave me a comment on the video of the live stream later on, and I'll respond to them later. And what I might even do is, because I think I might even pick them up in subsequent live streams, this whole theme, I guess, of empires, rise and fall of empires, is very much a thing at the moment. And I am planning to start a course in June on the rise and fall of empires, and you can get some more information about that at courses.jeffrichwriter.com. But yeah, it's a fascinating topic. But Babylon Berlin, I think I will probably be doing some more videos about that as well, because Germany was central not just to, the history of wars in the 20th century and of racism in the 20th century and of poisonous ideologies in the 20th century, nor was Germany alone in having that history. Let's talk about America, the ultimate icon of the progressive era, celebrated by the Rand Corporation. Woodrow Wilson was deeply racist. He enforced, racial segregation in the U.S. Army in World War One. He saw the victory of America in World War One as securing civilization for the white man. And again, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm just saying that's a reality, a complex historical reality that is really not addressed in the Rand Corporation. So yes, how do empires end? That's a complex question. I think I would summarize it really as in, 3 key points. There is no one way in which empires end. History generally does not follow cycles or repeat predictable patterns. The real skill of a good historian is to see the uniqueness of a particular set of historical events, a particular set of historical period and characters, to compare it to others, yes, to contrast it with others also, but to pick up that individual sense of reality, which ultimately is a test of discernment and judgment. And it's through looking at that individual nature of the individual sense of reality that I think is one of the skills you learn in doing history well, and one which is really not on display in the RAND Corporation's report, The Sources of Renewed National Dynamism. But it is this idea that finding the unique historical characteristics of a period is the central theme, and detecting a sense of reality is the theme of a brilliant essay by the, I guess, political philosopher, writer, essayist, after my own heart, Isaiah Berlin. And I'm going to be reading that essay as part of my series of essays, so slow readings of significant historical essays on the YouTube channel soon as well, following on from my reading of Walter Benjamin's philosophy on theses on the philosophy of history, of Halford Mackinder's The Geographical Pivot of History, not one I entirely agree with, but a very influential and significant piece of work. And also, just recently, I've read Chelmei's Hojoki, which is a classic of Buddhist Japanese literature from the 12th century, but it is also a reflection on history, the tragic events that befell Japan in that era, how people responded, how our lives can seem like bubbles on a stream endlessly changing, and how one lives in tune with those changing times. That's the sort of thing I like to try to focus on in this channel. And thanks for those who've joined me live. Thanks so much, Pepperoni. I'm absolutely delighted by the whole idea of you herding the goats with the drones while listening to me chat about the end of empires. And I'm looking forward to seeing you chat in another live stream too. And for all of those who are joining later on in the sort of replay of the live stream, please leave me some comments. And if you get a chance, do join me live and chat away. I've really only just started up again this pattern of doing the live streams. I'm sort of tucked up in bed now. I love it. Pepperoni says they're all tucked up in bed now. I assume he means the goats. I'm trying some different times for the live stream, like I did it like 2 p.m. Australian or Eastern Australian time last week, and 6 p.m. Eastern Australian time this week. It can be a bit of a challenge with audiences in Eurasia and Europe and East Asia and America, the Americas. A lot of different time zones, but we'll just sort of persist with it. And I guess hopefully people, you can sort of spread the word about the opportunity to have a chat with me on these live streams. I'll also have in the video description below the ways in which you can support the Burning Archive channel through Buy Me a Coffee. There's also a Patreon page. But you can also support me directly through the thanks button on the YouTube channel. You can contribute directly there. You can support me by subscribing, liking and sharing, and help give my videos a bit of a boost in the YouTube algorithm. And you can also go to jeffrich.substack.com and subscribe to my free weekly newsletter, and even consider either donating a small tip through Buy Me a Coffee or taking up a paid subscription. And of course, never forget, you can also do some of my courses, sort of rethinking the sort of offers that I'm giving at the moment. But you can do some of my courses at courses.jeffrichwriter.com. And I hope that's been of interest and engagement for you. And I might leave it there for this week's live stream. And I'll be back next week on a Wednesday. I might even try to do it in the morning Australian time to be more suited to the American audience. And I might even have a bit of a look at that amazing television series, Babylon Berlin. But whether I do it in a live stream or in a pre-recorded video, I'll absolutely be doing that soon. So do look out for my content. I seem to be producing more content on a pretty regular basis now. And if you like poetry, I think on Sunday I'm bringing out my reading of Wallace Stevens' The Idea of Order at Key West. So there's a lot to look out for on the Burning Archive YouTube channel. And whether you're interested in geopolitics, history, culture, literature, or just living well in this challenging, sometimes distressing time of war and conflict and change, and trying to find a way to live peacefully together on this earth as one world, one family, one earth, as I think the great Sanskrit saying adopted by India as part of its presidency of the G20 said. Okay, thanks everyone. I might sign out now, and see you next time. And thanks for supporting the Burning Archive YouTube channel.